So you vape and you think you're vaping what's essentially a pure extract, and you probably are as pure as we can get it. But there are always going to be these residual toxins. And you might say, well, how is that possible? Again, big pharma is not involved. And so a lot of small companies that make this stuff, and some of the black market stuff is dangerous. People think, well, I'll vape, I won't smoke. But again, it's the same thing. You're exposing yourself to the heavy metals, the solvents, the things you may not find in tobacco smoke that you do find in a vape that can lead maybe to even greater problems down the line. And the bottom line is cannabis needs more exploration. And this is not a call to action. This is not a political agenda. It's just, as a pharmacist, this drug holds so much potential. That's all it is. It's potential, but it holds so much potential that it's worth exploring.
Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast R.P.H. and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 276. My name is Andrew.
And this is Michelle. And we have something new today where we have our guest is actually in our intro. Hello, Tom Viola.
Hello, Michelle and Andrew. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Have we done this before?
No, we haven't. I was going to say, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, normally it's just Andrew and I on our intro and we chat about whatever we want. And then we jump into our episode with the guests. But we thought we would switch it up. And so Tom is in the intro. That's awesome.
We're going to talk about cannabis, so let's blaze new trails today. How about that? See?
Oh, Tom and the jokes.
I like it.
Everyone, look,
Like
if again, this is one of your first times listening to our show, we've had Tom on a lot. And the reason why we keep having him on, in addition to just being like a great human being, and we get along personally with him, the listeners that have listened to him in the past absolutely love him. So you guys are in for a treat today. But we're going to start off with just our normal rambling things, like what's been going on this week, what's top of mind. I'm going to start off with something that I think is important. Normally, I don't really talk about too many other podcasts that are our competition, but there's a Dental Hacks podcast out there that you may all know about. And there was one specific episode that I downloaded and listened to that said, nobody gives a crap. And I loved it. If you guys haven't listened to it yet, essentially what it is they're saying, and it's just Dr. Alan Mead's on it, and he says, look, we need to get out of our own little minds thinking that we're all that. And like there's a whole bigger world that doesn't really, like they don't really care about what you're doing.
No.
And I think the reason, he didn't say it in the episode, but I think the reason why he was doing that is because you see on social media all the time where people get all high and mighty over their one little tiny opinion of, this is the fact, this is the life, and this is the only way that we can be. And it was a thrilling episode.
Well, I think that fits very much into like what is happening in our world as far as like, I hate to say politics and stuff, but like people trying to impose their beliefs and their stuff on other people. And I'm just like, y'all, who gives a crap? Like, men aren't masculine anymore. So what? So what?
Why do we have the titles in the first place? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Just stop it with the titles. Tom, let me ask you this. Let's bring you into this. So in your day-to-day, how much are you on social media?
Well, I'm trying to be as much as I can be. You know, the problem is, as you know, many of people who are listening to this know, I'm a full-time speaker. So a lot of it is managing my speaking business. I still teach. I teach at 16 schools, so I've got that as well. And so social media to me is wonderful, but I just don't have the time really to devote to it as much as I'd like to. And so I've had a few people help me along the way. But I would say if I had the time, if I could really devote, I'd be on social media probably 5 hours a day, maybe 6, just putting content up and engaging with folks, because who gets a chance to engage anyone when you're basically locked in your house?
That's so true. We were talking about that before we came on.
Yeah, actually, I'm very, well, not Andrew, do you have more on this topic? So I'd love to talk about like getting back into speaking, like being road warriors and going out to these conferences. I'm not sure how ready I am for it.
What about you, Tom? You ready for the getting out there?
I just did. I presented at the Hinman. I'm presenting at a couple of conferences in May. I did a couple of study clubs this month live. And I will tell you, it was, first of all, difficult for me because I was kind of rusty.
Yeah.
I had not presented live in over a year. And I'm so used to presenting to myself in front of a webcam and getting sick of my own jokes that, when I did it live, people actually laughing at it. I'm like, you found that was funny? I didn't think that was funny. I've heard that joke 1,000 times. Well, I've heard it 1,000 times, but they haven't. So, but I will tell you, it was humbling because I realized that even I could get rusty, even though I thought I had this down after years of presenting. But also travel itself was definitely mind-blowing for me. Being in a group of other people, more than, let's say, 10 people, being on a plane with 100 people, being in an airport with thousands of people. At first, you're like, oh, yeah, I remember this. This is normal. And then the gravity of COVID sits in and you're like, hey, wait a second. I'm in this airport terminal with thousands of people and we're all breathing the same air. Yeah, we have our masks on, but I don't know. I'm kind of nervous. Is this safe? So, yeah, it's been definitely eye-opening and a little humbling to me at the same time.
Did you feel that the attendees at the conference had those same types of feelings, or were they a little bit more like, COVID's COVID, let's get over it? I mean, you were in Atlanta, right? So, I mean, it's maybe a different vibe than maybe other parts of the world.
Yep. Look, I love the people at the Hinman meeting. Both the people that run it and the people that attended are incredible human beings. They're very perspective and very just good people, nice people. And so when I was there, I had a difficult time lecturing with the mask on.
Oh, yeah.
Because you got the lavalier mic on your tie and you're trying to project, but you can't really project from behind a mask because you really can't get enough energy, right, to push the words out. And so they were nice enough to say, look, we can't hear you. You're having difficulties. Just take the mask off. And I did. And so there's photos of me out there with my mask off lecturing. And I have to tell you, I looked at myself like, wow, I can't believe you actually took your mask off. But at the same time, it was necessary. And I think that the feeling there in Atlanta was, look, we got to do what we got to do. We got to get back to some type of normalcy. Yet in some of the other presentations I've done, everybody had their mask off. So it really depends on where I've been and the attitude, the prevailing attitude, which is, I've been vaccinated, the whole room's been vaccinated, let's move on, which is debatable. Yeah. I mean, we can get into both sides of that argument, but let's face it. I just heard news this week, I'm sure you heard too, that both Pfizer and Moderna think we're going to need booster shots.
Third one, yeah.
Which I thought anyway. I was like, that's why I have room on my card. I was like, isn't that why? There's other slots. I just assumed it was for boosters.
Yeah. I'm looking forward, though, to international travel. Next year, we have, Europerios. Next year, there is the International Federation of Dental Hygienists Symposium, which we all went to. Tom, you were there in Australia. So they had one again. That one's going to be in Dublin. And I mean, I know this is future. This is more than a year away for these conferences, but I'm just like, I am ready to get back into this travel.
And I'm not, surprisingly.
It was an eye-opening experience being in a...
So what changed? Because you used to be all about that, Michelle.
I don't know. I think it's just, I'm in a routine now that I haven't had in 6 years, 7 years. And honestly, though, I think for me I think I'll get into it. It'll be fine. But my first few experiences of being out in the world, the energy exchange amongst other people was exhausting. And my mental, I didn't mentally enjoy that. Even just seeing patients again, we talked about it on the podcast, seeing patients for the first few weeks back, I was like, I come home and I'm truly exhausted. And I don't think it's the physical part of doing hygiene. I think it's the mental exhaustion that's getting me. So I think I'm just I don't know, I'm definitely very opinionated, obviously. I have a lot of thoughts and stuff. So when I go out and I see people being flippant about anything, my tolerance level is none. It doesn't even exist. Sure. So then I get frustrated with things. I mean, this is all stuff that I probably need to control too, but I just the energy exchange amongst people after being and living by myself and being in a pandemic for a year, I'm not ready for it. And also the hustle of it. Holy crap. I hustled. I can't even believe what I used to do. And all of us used to do 6 flights in a week, 3 different time zones, eating while I'm on a Zoom call, while I'm boarding a plane. I just don't wanna. I don't want to do it anymore. Like, not right now. Like, I'm leisurely drinking my coffee while I walked my dog this morning. Like, that was lovely. And I want to live that life a little longer.
It's interesting about what you say, though, Michelle, because I feel like as an introvert myself, I've always felt that way about people. I've always felt that draining, whatever, being around people. And I'm wondering, do you think that you've been able to overcome your introvert tendencies for all these years, and now you're starting to be like, oh, maybe I really am an introvert? Or did you get turned into one because of the pandemic?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think I've always was that introvert extrovert person. Like, I think I am very good at being an extrovert and I like to be around people, but ultimately I want to not be like, I need to go home and sit in a hotel room, order room service and not be bothered. And I've been getting that nonstop here, and that's been
nice. I think I said this before on the shows. Since we moved to Florida, well, specifically this house, which I think was like September, October, Allison's put less than 1,000 miles on the car in 6-7 months. She just doesn't drive anywhere. And to get to the store here, I mean, the Publix is like a mile and a half down the road, but like she has things delivered still. Like she just doesn't ever leave now. It's so funny. It's so funny to me.
Same. I don't want to, if I never have to go into a grocery store again, done. Instacart sends me Costco's. Yes, 100%. And I guess I could tell everybody my big news, my big changes in life.
I think we should.
So, and Tom gets to hear it firsthand.
Should I just say no? Like, no. All right, let's wrap. No. Let's go to the interview, everyone.
Interview portion. So I'm actually going to sell my house here in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm going to travel the country and live in new cities every few months.
Tom, I mean, you've hung out with Michelle before.
Wow.
Michelle is a lifer for her beloved little town.
My beloved Charleston. And listen, I mean, I talk about it all day long, but I think now that I've been here, I was getting culture and experiences while I traveled. And then when I got like stuck here and saw that it was just a homogenous society with no culture. And really all there is, I mean, the food is great. The history is great if they tell it properly and they're not whitewashing it and all of that. Like it's all great, but I'm like over it. I'm like, I want to see the country and I want to live in new places. I want to meet new people all over. And so I'm just going to pick fun cities and live there for a while and pick up and go to a new one every few months.
The beauty of being single in that respect is you can do whatever you want. And me too, I've been single for a while and I've been living here in New Jersey, but I get the itch too, Michelle, to say, hey, what else is out there? What am I missing? I've been living here for so long. So maybe this is a start for something for me to start thinking about too. Like,
gonna be fun.
What cities would I like to live in? Right?
Start get creative.
Maybe we just get a bunch of our dental friends in the same situation and you guys just have essentially timeshare. Just start buying houses across the country and you just rotate every 3 months to a new place.
That would be fun. But I will say, I would love to hear from my dental peeps out there. If you have really cool cities that you think would be fun to go live in, you're all across the country. What I want to do is get my volunteer license if it's available in whatever state I go to. Because I do want to still treat patients, but I would like to do it like go volunteer in community outreaches or mobile vans or whatever it is out there. So if you have one or somewhere that I could go like volunteer and treat patients, tell me because I want to still do that. That's my stuff.
Michelle, could we have a pact between you and I that wherever you go, I follow you like 3 months later?
So if I can pave the way for you. Yes.
Right. Would you mind? I mean, we don't have to be in the same city at the same time, but just give me like, Tom, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes,
here's where we're 100%.
going. 100%. All right, I might even just do a video diary for everybody so you can see the highs and lows of it. Highs and lows of it.
All I ask.
Maybe we could just start like a speaking train. And like, I'll speak there in the city on infection control. And then you can follow with all your pharmacology. And then we'll just get more people to do this train. And we'll just have this never ending speaking hygiene dental world coming to a city near you.
Like a sound effect right now would be like the love train. We should be playing that in the background right now. And get on board. Like,
yes. Awesome. The dental train.
I love it. That's great.
Well, I'm excited for our topic today. What is this month? Cannabis Awareness? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think it's Cannabis Awareness Month.
Cannabis Awareness Month, which I am very aware of cannabis, and thank you to the growers of the world. However, we are going to talk about some of the pharmacology side of it with Tom today. That's why he is here. So let's get into the interview with Tom Viola.
Before we get to the interview, we want to say a big thank you to Paradise Dental Technologies, or PDT, for supporting the continuing education portion of this podcast for so many years. If you do not know already, many of our full-length episodes count for CE. You'll find the links in the show notes, or you can sign up for our newsletter by going to aTale2Hygienist.com. When you sign up for the newsletter, we will periodically send out links to shows that have expiring CE courses attached. And none of this could be possible without the support of the amazing people over at PDT. So check out their hygiene and other instruments at pdtdental.com. That's pdtdental.com. Now, on to the interview.
Okay, everybody, here is the interview portion with Tom Viola. Welcome to the podcast and to talk about a very cool topic of cannabis. Where do you want to start, Tom? Or do you want to introduce yourself? We pretend like everybody knows you, but you want to tell us some things about you.
Well, I just went to a conference and I was speaking, and two people, individuals who I'd never met before, independently walked up to me and said, "Oh, I've heard you speak. You're Mr. Pharmacology." And I'm like, that's my title now, Mr. Pharmacology? Really?
That's not a bad.
Couldn't it be Mr. Big Biceps? That would have been awesome, but you need big biceps to be called Mr. Big Biceps.
And it's better to have a big brain. Better to have a big brain.
So Mr. Pharmacology is what I'm known as, but really it's just me. I'm just Tom. My name is Tom Viola. Hopefully if you've heard me before, you know all about me, but to sum it up real quick, I'm a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for over 30 years, but now I speak and teach mostly. I love it. I enjoy it. And the best part about speaking and teaching is I get to meet you guys. I get to interact with you and maybe even be a part of your lives or have an impact on your careers. And that makes this so worthwhile for me. So thank you all for listening while I'm talking today. But listen, you know I love working with Michelle and Andrew. I mean, it's a real treat to be part of it, Taylor to Hygienist. So thank you guys for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure for sure.
Yeah, thank you. But you also have something really cool happening with another one of our favorites, Dr. Pam Maragliana Muniz. You are doing, what is it, Medical History Mysteries.
Yeah, she's an amazing human being and an amazing person to work with. We get along so well. We're like two peas in a pod, and it's called Medical History Mysteries. And we do about 5 to sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes a little less minute, just topic of the day, whatever it is. But it's really geared towards what is it on the medical history that you might be missing, or what is it on the medical history that you might be taking into consideration so that you can make better clinical decisions and better treatment planning decisions. So it's all about medical histories and also the topic of the day so that you're more well-rounded when you approach a patient's care. Awesome. Great. Love doing it. We're going to be recording a bunch more this weekend.
Nice.
As a matter of fact.
Yeah, those are great. And they're video format, right? So here's a funny thing, don't let our listeners get mad at me, please. But sometimes I'll play video through my Bluetooth on my car and just still listen to it. So I think that's, don't feel like you have to always be in front of a computer, in front of a screen to be able to hear what Tom and Dr. Pam are talking about as well, because you can just kind of just play it and going through there. And it's, was that on Dentistry IQ? Where's that found?
Yep, Dentistry IQ. We post one, I think, every week or something like that, or every couple of days. And there's a library that obviously on Dentistry IQ you can go listen to. Plus, I'm actually in the process of posting them on social media and on my website so that you'll be able to access previous episodes. Yeah, it's really cool. And they did a cool intake, intro and outro, like all crackling lightning and thunder and all that. It's really well done. Well done.
So our topic today is all about cannabis. So where should we start?
So the first thing I want to talk about with cannabis is I am not political about this at all. Okay. So everything I say is just more what I've experienced in the past about cannabis, what people have told me about it, what I've seen with my own eyes, and what I've had as far as exchanges, not just with dentists and hygienists and assistants, but also with patients. And the bottom line is cannabis needs more exploration. And this is not a call to action. This is not a political agenda. It's just, as a pharmacist, this drug holds so much potential. That's all it is. It's potential, but it holds so much potential that it's worth exploring.
Do you see more research coming from Europe?
Oh, yeah. And the reason is because of the legal quagmire that we're in the United States with cannabis. I often tell the story about alcohol, which kind of led the trail for cannabis and made us choose differently. Alcohol was a big deal in the early 1900s. A lot of states loved it. A lot of states hated it. And so the only way to get that resolved was to go to a higher authority, the federal government. But in order for the feds to do anything, since the states have all the authority and we're a constitutional republic of states, the states had to give that power to the federal government. And they did that with a constitutional amendment. And 10 years later, it was a dismal failure. And we had to issue another constitutional amendment to repeal the first one. So nobody ever wanted to go down that road again because it was just so overwhelming. And so when the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 passed, that meant that the federal government took control of controlled substances. But the states never really ratified it. They never really said, we'll agree to it. They just said, well, okay, for now. And it only took 5 years for the state of California to opt out. And since then, a lot of states 33 states have opted out of marijuana being a controlled substance in their state. So now the quagmire is if you're in a state with cannabis, as long as you're in that state and it's legal and you have the right to have it, whether it's a medical marijuana program or a recreational program, you're fine. But don't cross a state line with it. Because when you cross a state line, that's interstate trafficking and that's illegal according to the federal government, because even though the states have authorized it, it's still illegal. It's still a controlled substance, Schedule 1 at the federal level.
And interestingly, like if you have a federal job and you're in a state that allows it, you still are not supposed to do that for your job.
Right. Technically, as if you violated a federal law, no matter what state you're in, and then you have cannabis in your possession, you're going to get arrested for possession of cannabis, even though the state you're in allows it to be used recreationally or for medical purposes. I don't know what you guys do for fun, but I'll tell you what I did for fun at the airport. I would, when I had time between flights, I would hang out by the gates where flights were arriving from Denver, and I would just sit there with my black suit on and my shades, and people thought I was a DEA agent. It was great. People would get like all panicky. Who is this guy?
That'd be awesome.
My favorite pastime is also messing with people, so that's great. So as far as like, I don't know, what's the next step with this? Is it talking about how it would affect our patients? Is it talking about the benefits, if any? I know we have to explore more and understand it a little bit more as far as the benefits go, but I don't know, what's next in this topic?
Well, and you kind of started the conversation off well, Michelle, when you said, what about Europe? So the end of that discussion leads into this one, which is, okay, so it's illegal here at the federal level, but it's legal at the state level. Big pharmaceutical companies would not put any money into it because they can't sell it. Because unless they can sell it at every state, these companies do interstate commerce. If they can't sell it in every state, if it's illegal at the federal level, there's no reason to explore it or put money into it. So what do we have? We have smaller studies being done, which are done grudgingly, not on the part of the researcher, but the part of the DEA. They don't like to distribute samples of cannabis to be tested, right? And to authorize it in the first place. So yeah, we get most of our information from Germany, the Netherlands, and mostly Canada, because they've had a long history of using cannabis recreation.
Oh.
So yeah, that's the problem. We just can't do any research. So there's all this potential, but there's no research being done.
Can you imagine being the person that's like selected to do that research and you're like, okay, Mr. Agent, now you want me to like in front of you take this drug. Like this isn't a trap, right? Like this is okay. I'd be so scared to do it.
I'm going to walk out of this building. I'm not going to get arrested, right? You sure? Okay.
Oh, man.
So the part about cannabis that is somewhat alarming is the fact that we have all this potential, and yet very few health care practitioners and professionals know enough about cannabis to have that conversation with their patients. Or to put it another way, we're so used to in dentistry being the experts on all things oral cavity related, and yet our patients are more expert on cannabis than we are.
Yeah, some of them are.
I mean, when you have more experience in one thing, I think that's,
Agree. Well, think about it. There's a bunch of speakers on cannabis. I'm always presenting on cannabis. There's a few of us. And I will tell you the information I hear. No, I'm not bludgeoning any other speakers here, but the information I hear from other speakers sometimes makes me scratch my head like, wait, I didn't think that was true. Like, so in addition to the fact that there's no research being done, there's a lot of misinformation about this plant as well. And that's what I hope we get into today. Let's really talk about cannabis and what it can do and what it can't do. and some of the information that dental professionals need to know about cannabis, because it does affect dentistry. It does affect treatment planning.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So when we talk about cannabis, are we talking THC and CBD, or what are we actually talking about when we talk about cannabis?
Right. So cannabis, first of all, it's called, people ask me all the time, why do you call it cannabis? Isn't it just marijuana? And I say this with respect. So if anybody who's listening, okay, I want you to know that I mean this with the utmost respect. I refer to people in the cannabis industry as purists, not only because they know cannabis in its most pure form. These are the people that grow it, harvest it, they run dispensaries. These are the people that will know this plant better than I ever will. Okay, and the reason for that is because I'm not intimately involved in the actual process of growing and harvesting cannabis. But having said that, purists will tell you that they do not want to refer to this plant as marijuana because that word was used to demonize this plant for since the 1800s. So they refer to it by its botanical name, cannabis. But you're right, Michelle, that gets to be confusing now. So what exactly are we talking about? The cannabis plant contains over 66 cannabinoids and more. We don't really know all of them yet. Over 500 compounds. Again, we don't know more about them either. But we do know that the two darlings of our world when it comes to cannabis are THC and CBD. Yet they have very interesting and very different properties. And so if you had to boil it down, you'd say, okay, THC is the hallucinogenic psychoactive portion of cannabis. It's what causes the euphoria. It's what causes the appetite stimulation. It's what causes, the feeling of relaxation. CBD, cannabidiol, it's psychoactive, but it's not hallucinogenic. So it's responsible for helping you deal with pain and anxiety. But the little known fact is that while THC often serves as an agonist, CBD often serves as an antagonist. And what that means in English is too much of a good thing with THC can be curbed by a little CBD as well. And that's how we got into hybridization, crossbreeding, GMO, cloning in the cannabis industry, because the three species of cannabis that are naturally occurring don't all have the properties we're seeking. Sativa, the one that's grown mostly in the southwest part of the United States, is not even really a plant. It's more like a tree. And it's loaded with THC, which is what everybody desires, but not so much CBD. Okay, so that's a X against the sativa. Okay, well then what about indica, which everybody loves indica, right? Because indica is more mellow, right? But indica has sort of an even balance of THC and CBD, and that really doesn't make people very happy because they want more THC. And then you have ruderalis. Ruderalis is like the stepchild of the whole family, okay? It's not really well accepted because it doesn't really offer us much. But the one thing ruderalis offers to the industry is that it can flower in about half the time that the other two can flower. And as we'll get into probably today, the flowers are where everything's at. So guess what? I got three species of a plant that don't do what I want. Mix them up, crossbreed them, and all of a sudden I've got my ideal, So, all right, so getting back to your question about THC and CBD. THC and CBD combined, if they're in the right ratio, and a lot of people have told me this, I have no experience myself, but I've said, okay, I want like 4-to-1. I want 4 parts THC, 1 part CBD to take the edge off. So this way, if I'm doing a lot of THC, I don't get the paranoia, the paradoxical anxiety, that I shouldn't be getting those feelings. I should be getting not dysphoria, but euphoria. Well, that's why I need the CBD to sort of temper the THC. But then there's this whole cadre of other cannabinoids, CBN, CBC, CBG, that very few people know about. But if you've noticed, if you watch closely lately, especially in the oral care division, you've seen products that have CBD now start to contain CBN. Why is that? The best answer I can come up with is you got to remember that at the end of the day, THC and CBD are prescription drugs. THC is the active ingredient in Marinol. CBD is the active ingredient in Epidiolex. And so at any time, the FDA could say, by the way, those are prescription drugs. Where's your prescription? Unlikely to happen, but it could.
It's not cool.
No, I don't want to have a prescription for an edible. I mean, that's going to drive everybody bananas. So, A lot of people ask me, well, why is it a controlled substance? And the answer is because the federal government says it's a controlled substance, but it doesn't have to be.
So when we look at like oral care, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead or not, but like when we look at oral care, like you'll see CBD in like toothpaste and stuff now. Like what's the reason for that?
Because CBD has a stabilizing effect on mucosal surfaces and membranes. So it's soothing and it promotes healing. There's a lot about CBD we don't know, which is a good and a bad thing. I can include it in oral care products, and based on some research, which is sometimes only anecdotal, I can come up with the idea that I should include CBD because it's stabilizing to the mucosal surfaces, right? But what's the empirical data to back that up? That's where it gets to be a bit of a gray area.
And what does that mean? It's stabilizing to the mucosa.
I wish I knew.
Okay, good. I'm like, I hear it, but I don't like know what that means really. Does it mean it would decrease inflammation?
I imagine so, that it probably decreases inflammation and makes the mucosa more resistant to wear and tear, to minor injuries and that sort of thing. But the reason I said that, Michelle, and it was a great, perfect question you asked, is what does that mean? And the answer is, I don't know, because that's what they tell me is why they include it. But it's almost like pseudoscience. It's almost like, okay, so what's the point? Why would you include it? Well, it stabilizes the surface, the mucosal surface. But what does that mean? Well, we don't really know, but it seems to work. It's that pseudoscience that's promoting cannabis and killing it at the same time.
Well, this is harken back to what you said, like there's not a lot of research because of some of the things that prohibit us from doing research on it.
Yeah, and think about who's running this industry, who's moving this industry forward. It's not a government agency. It's not big pharma. It's a bunch of smaller companies, which is great because I'm all for, smaller companies blazing the trail, no pun intended, leading the way. But at the same time, that leads to a lot of discrepancy as to what actually is available as product. We talked a little bit before about how all three naturally occurring types of cannabis don't do what we want. But that led now to all of this GMO, all of this genetic modification, where we've got over 100 hybrids now. Some of them have really cool names too, like Skywalker and Death Star and New York City Diesel and Maui Wowie. But we really don't know what the best combination is. It's a very much a personal decision on the part of our patients.
I'm impressed by your knowledge of the hybrid names, by the way.
Listen, some of this stuff sticks in my head, man. So if you ever hear me mumbling about Maui Wowie, it's not that I use it. It's probably because I'm trying to remember it because I'm old and I can't remember certain things.
Before we keep going, I don't want to get lost in the like I'm still visualizing the plant and like where we're extracting certain points of it. And you said something about the flowering. I was wondering if we can go back to that before we keep going on.
I will tell you, I'm a child of the 80s, and no offense intended here. I don't want people to get offended, but in the 80s, we bought, not I, because I was a pharmacist, and if I was caught with a positive urine test, I'd be basically thrown out and restricted from practice. But those people that did purchase cannabis in the 80s bought a dime bag, which was a colloquial expression for $10 worth of cannabis material. So what was in that bag that you bought? Mostly stems, seeds, and leaves, right? That led us to believe that the leaf contained the actives, right? You heard the word pot, you heard marijuana, you thought it was the leaf, right? But it turns out, well, people are devotees to the leaf. Some people get pictures taken, they get paintings made. Some people
this is not very good branding for cannabis. All I know is the leaf.
Right? And some people get leaf tattoos. And I have to tell you, whenever I say cannabis leaf tattoo, I kind of chuckle. Not at the person. It's their choice. But I laugh at the time because I'm thinking at the time we thought it was all about the leaf, the iconic fan leaf, the beautiful symmetrical fan leaf. And all it was exactly the opposite. The actives were really part of the flower. The flower is where all the good stuff is. And so, okay, get this. Cannabis plants are decidedly male or female. So you've got male plants and female plants. A lot of other plants are hermaphroditic. Like I'm trying to grow an avocado plant right now from a pit from an avocado, which is growing pretty well, except I realize I can't ever get avocado fruit from it because I need to be able to cross-pollinate with another plant. Right. So, okay, but the avocado has both male and female organs in it, so you could self-pollinate if you catch it at the right time of day. I don't really know much about it. It's a cute plant, okay? But the point is, cannabis is male or female. So the male plants make pollen. The female plants produce flowers. The male plant's job is to pollinate the female plant so that it'll make seeds to make more plants. But when that happens, the female plant's flowers, the THC production drops considerably because now the plant's busy making seeds. So for the industry, that's heartbreaking because now there's a waiting cycle. So what's the best way to get around this? Ditch the male plants, right? So the male plants make pollen that nobody wants, and that's all they contribute. So if you're thinking to yourself, this is just another reason why males are useless, try not to, but you're probably right, okay? So that's a joke. Okay, just kidding. So anyway, so the female plants make all the good stuff, right? Okay. So if we keep them from the male plants, desperately seeking pollen, the female plants make bigger and bigger flowers, which means more and more actives, right? Which is great. But so if you said to me, who's really making all the good stuff in this industry? I would say it's a bunch of sexually frustrated female plants who are trying desperately to find pollen. Okay. Anyway, so the point is now I have to harvest the plant, right? So the flower means, okay, I got to wait. For most species, right, the sativa and indica, I've got to wait up to 16 weeks for a flower to be produced again. Why would I want to go through all that trouble when I could just clone the plant I have? And that's where cloning becomes part of this industry. Why wait to germinate, grow, and foster the growth of a new plant, which takes weeks, when I can just clone the plant I have and get the product faster?
I don't even understand how you clone a plant.
So cloning means like you like a lot of people who have very green thumbs, not me. Every plant I have dies a horrible death. But if you know enough about it, you know how you can like cross germinate. You can like graft.
Oh yeah.
The you know what I mean? Right. So that, and I don't know much more about it than that because I wish I knew more about botany. I wish I was Matt Damon in The Martian. That was a great movie about botanizing. Okay, but what do I know? Anyway, the point is, all I know is they grow clones and they do a really good job at it because they can keep the product consistent. Now, then the industry changes. Why? Because we realize that it's not the leaf, it's not the flower. The main actives are really located in these little hairs on the plant called trichomes. Now, the trichomes are small. You really can't see them. But if you can separate the trichome from the plant, you don't need the plant anymore. And that led to the entire subset of this industry called extractions, where you can extract the good stuff from the trichomes with solvents and never need the plant again. And so that led to things like dabs, like waxes and oils, edibles, and everything which is not green. Obviously, you know, right? There's no plant material in them, but they still contain the active ingredients.
Well, I Googled cannabis flower and I think the leaf definitely wins for like one. Like it's not pretty.
It's not. That's the thing. And that's why, you know, look, okay, so what did we do for years? We took the flower. The flower is very gooey. It's not very attractive looking. It's very sticky, right? What do we do with it? We dried it out to make it more manageable, easily handling. And that's why we got the word bud, right? So dried flowers are called buds. And everybody traded in buds forever. But now we're actually, the majority of this industry is trading in the extracts.
I've learned a lot already.
So what do you do with an extract? So you vape it, right? That's how we got vaping cartridges, because you can extract the good stuff from, now there is a vape device called the PAX device, which you can actually vape the plant material directly. But for all intents and purposes, whenever you see an oil, whether it's being used for a vape or an oral oil, that's an extract. How do you extract? Solvents. And that's where the next part of the story is interesting, because that led to some lung diseases along the way.
Oh, I mean, we've had a course on vaping on this podcast. So we know that that's not obviously ideal. Are we seeing more of that, less of that out there in the world?
Okay, we used different solvents to extract, right? So we used butane for a while, but butane's nasty, you know, and who wants to inhale something that's got butane, residual butane in it? Ugh, nobody, right? Then we used vitamin E acetate, which was a food product, which was considered safe. But the problem was that when you inhaled it, it caused a condition called EVALI, which is electronic cigarette or vaping associated lung injury, over 2,000 cases, over 60 people died from Mavali. So the CDC never said it was actually the vitamin E acetate, but when we did bronchial alveolar lavage of these people, that's what came up in the sample. Okay, so now what? Now we have a whole cadre of solvents, MCT oil and all sorts of, all these different solvents, mostly now isopropyl alcohol. And the point is we want to extract the stuff from the trichomes and then evaporate off as much as we can of the solvent so there's a very little residual left. And then we have almost a pure extract. But there's always going to be stuff left in that sample. There's always going to be heavy metals because they're naturally occurring in the soil and because plants grown for vaping, not everywhere, I'm just not whitewashing the whole industry, but some of the black market stuff especially is grown in conditions where mold is present, so you have to use fungicides. There's heavy metals, chemicals from fungicides, known carcinogens that are found in the soil, benzene and toluene. So you vape and you think you're vaping what's essentially a pure extract, and you probably are as pure as we can get it, but there are always going to be these residual toxins. And you might say, well, how is that possible? Again, big pharma is not involved. And so a lot of small companies that make this stuff and some of the black market stuff is dangerous.
I mean, do we take this conversation now into our patient and like what we might be seeing with them?
Right. So the next step in this is, okay, so people vape. Okay, so what does that mean? So first, what are the overall systemic effects? Well, just from the vape itself, your heavy metal exposure. It's not good to fill your body with tin, zinc, lead, cadmium. Okay, so there could be issues there. Sometimes the flavoring agents cause problems because if you've ever seen someone who vapes, when you walk behind them, for example, it smells and tastes like skunk sometimes, right? It's not very nice tasting. So we add flavors. Well, one of the flavors that we add called diacetyl, when you vape it enough, can actually cause a condition known as bronchiolitis obliterans, which is often commonly known as popcorn lung. The reason it's called popcorn lung is because the first people to get it were people who worked in microwave popcorn plants, because that's where they used the diacetyl as the butter flavor for the microwave popcorn. And so there's systemic effects, right? Okay, forget it, Viola. I don't want to vape. I'll use oral oils. Okay, but the oral oils and the sublingual oils that are really extracts, as we said, have flavoring agents too. We don't know the long-term effects of exposing the mucosa to that. And we don't know the long-term effects of exposing the oral tissues to what's in the vape cartridge. Propylene glycol and glycerin, which are often used as solvents in the oral cartridges, can be very drying. Glycerin especially can make the bacteria stick to the teeth and the mucosa way better than they normally do. So that can actually make it more difficult for our patients because now it encourages caries and encourages advancing periodontal disease. It's a lot of information.
It is. I know. I'm trying to grasp which question I want to ask, but I also don't want to derail you. So if you have more, I can save my questions.
Well, the only thing else I wanted to say was besides the overall systemic effects and the effects on the oral cavity, there are some take-home points that I want to make sure we talk about first, and then we dig into them deeper. Besides just the fact that it's a vape and it's an extract and all that other stuff, what does cannabis do to you? No matter how you take it in, whether it's vaping, smoking, whatever, what does cannabis do to you that would affect dentistry? And I'd like to say it's really two different spheres. The first sphere is cardiovascular. Everyone assumes, rightfully so, that cannabis is something that makes you mellow, calms you down, right? Relaxes you. But cannabis actually causes hypertension and tachycardia. So it raises your heart rate and it raises your blood pressure. That can be problematic in dentistry because in addition to that, patients who use cannabis heavily are resistant to the effects of anesthetics. So you paint yourself into a corner pretty quickly when you think about it, because if someone's resistant to anesthetics, what do? Give them more, right? But now you realize you've given more anesthetic and more epinephrine to a patient who, by their very use of cannabis, is already hypertensive and tachycardic. So that's a systemic dilemma, if you will. The other sphere here is immunosuppression. Cannabis works on naturally occurring receptors in our body called CB2 receptors. And the net effect of that is immunosuppression. So it leaves the patient more open to opportunistic infection, but also HPV infection, because a lot of people share vape devices and share, marijuana cigarettes. So now head and neck cancer is a potential problem. And again, who are the experts in all of this? The pathologies that we see in the oral cavity, it's us. So that's why we need to know as much about cannabis as our patients do, because we need to be looking for the ultimate outcomes that are somewhat negative for our patients through the use of cannabis.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that side of it. And it's interesting to hear about like the heart and anesthetic. I'm trying to, so I have quite a few friends who, for sleep issues, severe anxiety, they will vape before bed or something like that. But I also think a lot of their anxiety, sleep issues are rooted in sleep apnea and like sleep disorders. But I don't know, they're just on it every night. It's just like a routine now. And then when they go for dental procedures, they struggle. And I'm like,
Yeah, I know a lot of people who do an edible before bedtime. That's their routine. They brush their teeth and then take an edible or vice versa. And to them, that's their way of getting a good night's sleep. I will tell you from personal experience, I've tried CBD. It hasn't helped me at all. But I know plenty of people who say it works really well for them, that they get a good night's sleep and they're well rested in the morning. So it's kind of hard to say. I think it depends on the product you get.
Yeah, and probably placebo effect. And this is why all of the research would be so lovely to have. So we can really see if it's a placebo. I give my dog CBD. I don't know if it works. It tastes like bacon and she takes it. So yeah, she seems to sleep. I don't know.
I think Tom just needs a better dealer is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Get better product, Tom.
A better supply. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
No, I feel like all of this is super interesting because, working in Oregon and Washington, which it wasn't just like legalized, but it was just a part of the culture. Like that was everywhere. And I feel like we didn't really know the questions to be asking. So we said, marijuana, yes, no. That's it on the medical dental history. And then I don't remember factoring in, Tom, I did a lot of anesthetic. I swear I don't remember ever factoring in that ability. However, the one thing that we did do is we always took blood pressure before we delivered anesthetic. So if they weren't presenting as hypertensive, then obviously it wasn't really coming into play. So I think that would probably be kind of the saving grace for everybody, just like make sure like this is another reason that we need to be taking blood pressure before all of our procedures that we do.
Couldn't have said it better. You've heard me lecture on that many times and preach from the soapbox about how we need to take blood pressures and so on. But Andrew, that raises a good point, because if they're not presenting as hypertensive and tachycardic, that means they probably haven't done cannabis recently. But I'm sure you guys know that a lot of people do pre-treat for their dental anxiety with cannabis. So now they've had just used cannabis, let's say, out in the parking lot, right, before they walked in. You can smell it, I can smell it, or if they vaped or used an edible, maybe not. So that's the first reason you have to ask a question. But then what about the ethical issues that come up a lot? Okay, this gal just said they used cannabis to pre-treat for their dental anxiety. I mean, does that mean that they're technically under the influence and therefore can't give you authorization for a treatment plan because they're under the influence? Better yet, what if you're the cannabis user? We work in an industry that's fraught with repetitive motion injuries, right? You get neck issues, back issues, wrist issues. What if you're the cannabis user? Even though you didn't use it per se at the job, you used it in the morning, you used it at night. Can I make the claim that you're under the influence and therefore you're open to malpractice liability? So there's so much we don't know about the plant as it is, but we also don't know its ultimate effect on our practice. All of that's got to be litigated. As a matter of fact, it's ongoing right now.
Do we know if there's a latent time period of they pre-treat out in the parking lot and you can't smell it when they walk in because it's an edible, and then you've delivered your local anesthetic, and now all of a sudden, all of those systemic effects, hypertension is now going to present 30 minutes later, 40 minutes later. Is that something we know about or not yet?
We don't know. I mean, as a matter of fact, the best analogy I can give you is driving, right? So you're driving and you're pulled over, and the officer who pulls you over sees evidence of cannabis, or knows you just by the smell or whatever, or you admit you have using cannabis, whatever. But alcohol is a blood test. There's a breathalyzer. I can just, breathe into this and tell me I can see your blood alcohol content. We don't have that with cannabis. So a lot of times if you get pulled over with cannabis, you get brought into the station and they have to do tests on you. I don't even know all the tests. I don't know much more about that. But there's an argument that could be made for was I under the influence or not. So imagine if law enforcement can't use it, how would we be able to determine that in practice? And we can't. We just don't have the means to do it.
But isn't so thinking about I guess this could be for clinicians and for patients, but if they take a Xanax before they come in or they're on any other kind of medication, I mean, wouldn't that kind of fall in the same realm of not really know? I mean, alcohol, like you said, yeah, that makes sense. We can do breathalyzers. You can usually smell that on people, especially if they are coming in. But as clinicians, if I took an edible before I went to bed, what's the difference between that and a Xanax or an Ambien, for Lord's sake? We all know what Ambien does to people. I mean, you're out driving cars and don't remember it.
Yeah. I will say that, if we're the prescriber of the Xanax, if the Xanax was prescribed by your dentist because the patient has pre-treatment anxiety, that's an argument right there. Well, okay, I'll make them sign the forms before they take the Xanax. But your point, Michelle, is well taken. What if I'm pre-treating because I have Xanax either for another condition, or my friend gave me a Xanax, or like you said, I took Ambien last night and I'm still in that latency period after where I'm really not there yet, still sort of under the influence. Yeah, you can make the same argument, but see, that's the problem with cannabis. With those other medications, you don't know if the patient is under the influence, but later on they could make that claim that, okay, well, I didn't really agree to that treatment plan. You did all this work on me and I was under the influence and didn't know you were going to extract those teeth.
This is so fascinating. This whole side of it makes me very interested because, I mean, one of the things that happened to me when I had my major emergency surgery 2 years ago was I signed and paid for my ER visit while on morphine and consented to the surgery while on morphine. And if that's happening, this seems so the minutia of in dentistry, who cares if somebody took a hit and, didn't, well, I mean, and then got anesthesia. Not who cares. I shouldn't say who cares, but if I was on morphine, that just feels like a bigger problem to deal with.
Right, because you don't know enough about cannabis to make that educated decision, right? You know a lot about morphine and its effects. We don't know a lot about cannabis and its effects. So that's why it's always seemed to be sort of diminished as, well, it's only pot, it's only cannabis, versus a heavy hitter like morphine or even Xanax, where everybody knows the effects because of we've had so much experience with it. The other thing we should know also is in addition to everything I've said about the effects on dentistry, is that ultimately patients who use cannabis aren't aware of all of the potential pitfalls. For example, what happened to just smoking a joint? Why doesn't anybody smoke cannabis anymore? I get this a lot. And the reason is because we may not know a lot about cannabis, but we do know about smoking, right? We do know that inhaling combustion products is never a good thing, right? That you can't even stand near a barbecue anymore without feeling somewhat guilty, because you're breathing in this combustion stuff, right? So there are those people who say, yeah, but you know what? Smoking cannabis is not as bad as smoking tobacco. And I have to say, I disagree with that. And the reason is because we hold cannabis smoke in our lungs longer than we hold tobacco smoke in our lungs, because we want the extra hit, right? But cannabis has more tar in it than tobacco does. So if you've looked at radiographs of people who, or even lung tissue samples of people who smoke cannabis heavily, they have more issues with their lungs. They have more pathology in their lungs than people who smoke tobacco. And that's the same thing with vaping. People think, well, I'll vape, I won't smoke. But again, it's the same thing. You're exposing yourself to the heavy metals, the solvents, the things you may not find in tobacco smoke that you do find in a vape that can lead maybe to even greater problems down the line.
Yeah. I'm curious about decay rate with edibles. If we have seen anything with that, or if that's even something on anyone's radar.
And that's why I brought it up before, Michelle. You led perfectly into that question, which was, my friends use edibles to sleep. I know a lot of people use edibles to sleep. Hopefully they brush their teeth after. But, edibles in themselves are gummy, right? So they stick to your teeth as it is. And if even if you did brush your teeth, the bottom line is forget everything else about cannabis. Forget the issues with immunosuppression, forget the cardiorespiratory issues. The fact is cannabis causes xerostomia.
That was going to be another question. I'm like, what's it happening with the saliva production or, okay, I guess lack thereof?
Right, so you got this sticky stuff all over your teeth, right? And now you got xerostomia. And if no other reason, then just that, the simple mechanics of the lack of simply sensational saliva means what? You're asking for, more issues with caries, even on surfaces where you don't expect to see caries, because it's not direct, it's indirect.
So are there conversations that okay, so we know maybe you're in a state that that it is legal, you can do this. This is something that you do to calm yourself before bed, recreationally, whatever it is. I mean, can we help them? Because obviously, we know, when we approach patients, well, you got to stop doing that. And we're never successful. So how do we help navigate or help them navigate, increased decay rate, xerostomia, any of the other issues that we might see for them?
Right. And I think you hit it right on the head, Michelle. Look, you and I both know there's been enough information presented on tobacco and its use and smoking to scare just about everybody away from doing it. And yet people still smoke. So it's going to be the same thing with cannabis. I get this a lot too about bongs. People say, well, I don't really smoke cannabis. I use a bong. And the bong or the hookah purifies the smoke before I breathe it in, because the way a bong works is, you have a combustion chamber, you've got a water chamber, and then you've got the pipe. So you draw the smoke through the water. And people think, well, that purifies it, because look at the bong water. It's disgusting, right? Obviously, it took all that stuff out of the smoke. But all a bong really does is cool the smoke down so you can breathe it in deeper and hold it longer. So it doesn't really have any saving grace in that. I mean, maybe it filters out some of the particulates, but bottom line is you're still getting that cannabis smoke in you. So yeah, whether you bong it, or whether you smoke it, just like the same analogy as tobacco, people are going to keep doing it. So what do we do to protect our patients? No offense, I hate to say this, but how do we protect them from themselves? And the answer is it's good oral hygiene. It's got to be scrupulous. It's got to be, now that I know you're a cannabis user, it's not like I painted a letter on your chest and said, okay, you're a cannabis user. But I've got to be more understanding as the hygienist that, okay, you're going to have more decay. You're going to present clinically more challenges for me than a patient who doesn't smoke or use cannabis. And I've got to be on top of the situation, because you're younger, you're healthier. You don't present to me as a patient who would have these issues this early in life, or you don't present to me as someone who would have these issues because you normally do follow good oral care. You have a good routine. You do have good habits. But because of use of cannabis, you've propelled yourself now, let's say in my mind, 30 years into the future, right? So now I'm more concerned about you developing periodontal disease and tooth movement and all this other stuff, because you're young and healthy, but your mouth is ultimately paying the price for your use of cannabis.
So we can use some of our motivational interviewing techniques that we've learned on this podcast, and if you've taken any other courses, and have those discussions, just like if they were, I don't know, eating sugar and all day, every day, or had a mouth breathing, whatever, to decrease their pH, we could just come up with some solutions and guide them without changing their habits.
Best part about this podcast. Yeah, right. It's the best part about podcasts like this is now everybody who's listening to this podcast knows all this extra stuff about cannabis that maybe they didn't know before. And now, because they're well informed, they can make those questions more impactful. They can, ask the right questions. And that's really the whole point of this education is I can talk all day about cannabis. There's so much to talk about. But if you just know some of the basics, you can make better clinical decisions later on. Remember that your patient uses cannabis, whether you want them to or not. And there are so many patients out there you don't see that are using cannabis that eventually, because of the effects of whether vaping or smoking, will come see you. And now you're much more aware of what to expect as soon as they say, well, I do smoke cannabis occasionally. Now you've got that whole conversation in your head ready to go.
And my last question I think I have, and I see this a lot in social media, but if I know a patient vaped, took a hit, whatever, before they came in, and I can tell maybe their eyes are a little more bloodshot, you can smell it. Maybe they are very relaxed. Is there any time where I just need to dismiss my patient?
Yeah, I think Andrew hit it before when he said about vitals. It's, first of all, it borders on the ethical question too. Okay, so the patient admits to it. You've, got enough evidence to prove it. Remember that right now the country's in the middle of this opioid epidemic, as I'm sure you've heard me speak about many times, right? One of the things that becomes part of this mandatory education is that you have to be able to ask the patient before you prescribe the opioid, do you have an issue with substances? Do you have a history of substance abuse? Are you currently using substances? Well, cannabis falls into that category. So that's where it overlaps with opioids. And if your doc's going to prescribe an opioid, or you're the hygienist with prescribing privileges and you're going to prescribe that opioid, you got to know that up front, because the use of cannabis could, as a gateway drug, although many people don't call it that anymore, could mean you're doing other substances as well. Maybe I just admit to the cannabis, but there's really other things I do that I don't want to tell you about. Well, that's a clue for us to say, okay, this patient has a previous history or existing issue with substances. I've got to be on it when I talk about prescribing an opioid. But more so than that, a lot of people use cannabis to replace opioids. In some states, cannabis has been approved to replace opioids in treating pain. In other states, it's been approved to replace opioids in opioid treatment programs. So in other words, you're recovering from opioid addiction and you use cannabis to treat yourself for opioid use disorder. Okay, so that means what? Now that's even more of a reason I need to know why you're using the cannabis, right? If there's a particular reason. But the bottom line is you've got to be able to ask those questions up front and then have enough follow-up questions. And if you have this sort of base foundation information in your head about what cannabis does, then you can ask those questions about substance abuse. You can ask questions about how it impacts their life. Do they vape or eat edibles before bedtime? And you can get a greater idea of what other substances they might be using that impact cannabis. So let me give you an example. Your doc prescribes an opioid. Your patient takes an opioid recreationally. They take a benzodiazepine like Xanax recreationally. They take a drug like ecstasy, MDMA, right, recreationally. But if they also use cannabis at the same time, that compounds the effects of both of those drugs. So it's an additive effect. So respiratory depression is an issue, and then central nervous system depression is an issue. And all of that, I'm sure everyone listening knows what that impact on dentistry is. So it's a lifestyle as much as it is a use of a single substance. And that's where you have to make that decision. Is this person, like you and I said, Michelle, just using cannabis to go to sleep at night? Or is it part of a greater issue they may have with substance abuse that is sort of simmering under the surface?
Okay. That was great. Thank you for breaking that down. Are there any other little tidbits that our listeners need to know about around cannabis and our patients using it?
I would say this. Cannabis has never had such widespread legal and social acceptance as it has now, right? It was always considered an illicit drug until, most of these states now passed legislation. There's so much we don't know about cannabis that I wish we did know. And we won't get there until we do the research and put vast amounts of money in it. There's a couple things that you should walk away from this with, besides the things we talked about already. One is, if you think about most households with alcohol in them and little children, usually that alcohol is locked up, right? Or somehow kept from them. Yet your children have never had greater access to cannabis than they have now. It's literally in your house. It's literally in that vape pen that you keep in your purse or in your pocket or leave it on your dresser. Trust me, children have greater access to cannabis than they ever did. And we do know about the developmental delays that are associated with its use. Primary exposure. But what about secondary and tertiary exposure? We don't know all those things yet. I mean, that's still being researched. Okay. The other thing is that while you may use cannabis recreationally and you may either smoke it or vape it, realize that at the end of the day, vaping is not vapor, it's aerosol. And so again, what about the secondary and tertiary exposure? You vape and you're in your whatever room of your house and you vape and you leave those aerosol particles just about everywhere. Now, somebody either walks through that same room after you vape, and I think you've all seen this, right? You're at a stoplight and the guy in the car in front of you is vaping, and the window's open, and all of a sudden, like a nuclear cloud comes out of the car. Like, it's this huge plume, right? Well, you're going to drive through that in about 10 seconds. So I hope you have your air conditioner on recirculate, because that's coming in your vents, and that's secondary exposure. But then those aerosol particles lying on the surfaces everywhere. Now, I'm the person who cleans that room, okay? I'm cleaning that room, and now those aerosol particles are re-aerosolized. I breathe them in. That's tertiary exposure. So the point is, if anybody's an expert in aerosols, it's us, obviously, after all of this with the pandemic. So keep in mind that your patients may live in a household with somebody who vapes, and they don't vape themselves. Or they may live in a household with somebody who smokes, and they don't smoke themselves, and yet they've had this secondary or tertiary exposure to cannabis.
Excellent information, as always.
Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome. Now let's all get something to eat, because I feel like I have the munchies. I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. It's only a joke.
It's early. We had an early morning episode. So yeah, we do. I need to get more coffee. I got to do things. But I would love for you to make sure that everybody knows where they can find you and more information. If you're speaking, upcoming things, like tell us all of it.
Yeah, there's plenty more to talk about with cannabis. If you attend my webinars or my seminars, live seminars, it's an easy 3 hours we can spend on much more involving cannabis. But by all means, the best way to find me is on my website. It's tomviola.com. And you can find lots of stuff there. You can find my blog. You can find courses you could take for CE credits on demand. And on social media, everywhere at Pharmacology Declassified. Why? Because I wanted you to type as many letters as physically possible. No, because that's the name of the company, Pharmacology Declassified. Hopefully, I'll see everybody there.
Yes. And if you want to hear more episodes from Tom that he's done with us at A Tale of Two Hygienists, you can actually head over to our website, and in the search bar at the top, you can just type in his name and it will pull up all of the episodes that he's ever done with us. They're great.
Hey, I have links to those on my website too. How about that?
Oh, perfect.
A Tale of Two Hygienists has its own page. How about
What? What? I mean, that's because you've been on so much. It deserved its own page. You've given us so much great content, and our listeners have already learned so much from you. So thank you very much for that.
You guys know how I feel about you. You are the leaders in this industry. What would we do without people like you in this industry to lead the way?
Aww.
So again, if no one says it to you, I'm going to say it to you. Thank you both for what you do to elevate this profession. You do an amazing job, and we're all in your debt.
Oh, thank you. I mean, but we are nobody without you, our amazing guests. So thank you. And I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. And thank you again, Tom.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
Well, another great week, another great episode. We thank you all so much for listening each week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, whatever podcasting app you're using. Also, just a reminder, our guests are so fantastic that they love when you reach out. They love when you interact with them on social media. And you can interact with us on social media as well at Instagram or Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn. You can find us at A Tale of Two Hygienists. You can also go to our website, aTaleOfTwoHygienists.com. And we would love for you to go there and subscribe for our newsletter. We have lots of stuff on our website. We have a learning center. You can search for any episode. This is an easy place for you to find the links for our CE courses and take the test. There's just so much more there. So head over to aTaleOfTwoHygienists.com. And if you want, you can also send us an email. I'm Michelle at aTaleOfTwoHygienists.com. And then there's Andrew, who is Andrew at aTaleOfTwoHygienists.com. And we just want to say thank you so much. If you love this episode and you're loving the podcast, we would love for you to subscribe and leave us a review. And, 5-star, go ahead and do it. 5-star, just hit that 5-star and then leave us a review. We really appreciate it. We love reading them. It fuels our fire. And we just appreciate you guys so much. I think that's it, Andrew. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, y'all.